Hello, welcome back to I Got Board Game.
I got board game.
I got board game. And so I'm Ben,
John.
and today we are actually doing an IGBG explains. We're gonna explain something to you.
Explainerd.
Explaining. And so today we are explaining trick taking or trick taking games.
Tricks.
That guy, his
Surprise!
finger,
His finger's cut off. It's a trick.
and he's taking it. So trick taking games. Oh, nice. There you go. There you go. So trick taking games or trick taking is a pretty traditional or older classic mechanic with a deck of cards, usually just a simple deck of cards with different suits. And so it's been around for a long time. I didn't grow up actually playing trick taking games. I don't think you did though, John, right?
Yeah. I played a few, or mainly one, but.
And so yeah, so when I kind of heard more about trick taking games in like as a mechanism in modern board games, it never really caught my attention that much. It might seem like it, especially to John when I've been bringing up a lot of trick taking games with him just recently.
Like every game in the last 4 spotlights.
Anyways, and so I mean, but yeah, it's not really a mechanism that catches my eye too much. But I do also hear from like John, people who did play it more growing up, that they actually enjoyed it when they were growing up. So that's kind of just different to me. Never really heard of it that much before. So, but getting into explaining trick taking, we're going to be doing a brief kind of introduction about how trick taking works as a mechanic, just the kind of most basic version of it, the key parts to it. And then we'll go on to the kind of traditional variants or traditional changes that can be added to a trick taking game. And then more modern variants or modern changes that have been combined with that trick taking mechanic. And so, yeah, how does trick taking work, John?
Yeah, so starting off, so what is trick taking? What does it mean? So the traditional and kind of the base of what it means to take a trick is typically it started off from kind of your original deck of cards, right? Like the 52 card kind of poker style set where you have your 13 cards, right? You have your ace through 10 and then the jack, queen, king, and they each have a suit, right? So in those traditional decks, diamonds, spade, or diamond, or clubs, diamonds, spade, or hearts and spades, right? So the way that a trick taking game and the mechanic works is basically all of the cards or most of the cards will be dealt out to players for the round to play the whole hand. And basically what you're doing in the trick taking is that you will have a leader player who will play a card in a particular suit. And that's the mechanic. It's a leading and then a follow and the followers that come after. So after the leader plays a particular suit, the followers will then have to play cards, will have to play a card from their hand in order that follows that suit. And typically in these games, you're trying to win so that you can be the leader of the tricks at that point. So it's kind of this lead and follow mechanic, and it's, usually you have to follow the leader. And then if you have a higher number, right, or a stronger card than the leader, then you'll be able to be the leader of the next round. Or if you don't have the suit of the card that is played by the leader, then you would have to play off suit or out of suit. And usually in traditional trick taking games or the traditional kind of types that we'll talk about a little bit, is you're usually not going to be able to win you're not going to be able to win in that suit at that point. But that's how traditionally trick taking as a mechanic and as it originally was created was kind of used in different kinds of games. And if you're thinking of the older games, think of games like spades, and hearts is another one, which we'll talk about a little bit in some of the variation of what it does, of what hearts does. But that's kind of the style of what trick taking is.
Yeah, and I think something that was confusing for me when I had heard about trick taking in modern games years ago was kind of the terminology. right,
Yes.
is I know even when you're explaining, you're kind of talking about the rounds that you're trying to win, right? Where then specifically, and I don't know why actually, but just so you guys know, in a trick taking game, each round where there's that one leader playing one card and everyone following with a card, that round is called a trick. And
Yes.
so then, yeah, it was just kind of confusing to me. It's like, why
Yeah.
is this
So
called a trick?
yeah, and the best, I think the full terminology is tricks are what we consider the rounds, or in a sense, yeah, a round, right? So every player has a turn during a round,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the trick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you watch our rules and turn order videos, we explain this terminology
Mm-hmm.
and how we're talking about it right now. And then all of the cards and all of the rounds for that play are considered a hand, right?
Okay.
Typically, right? So you have a hand to play for all of the tricks that will be coming through.
Mm.
So each trick is a round, and then the entirety of all of the tricks that are played is the hand. And then
Okay.
that's the
Okay.
end of, and then I think they use a round at that point officially.
Mm.
But kind of talking about how we've used rounds, right? Round can be very interchangeable also in these kinds of circumstances. But that's
So
typically how it plays out. And usually it's once all of the tricks have been played out, that's when a scoring phase of some kind will occur in the
mm.
game.
So yeah, so
Typically.
just wanted to point that out to you
Yeah.
guys because we might end up obviously in this video using the term trick a lot, referring
Mhm.
to that round, right? That
Mhm.
single played round, just because that is the terminology with this mechanic.
Mhm.
And so then going on to the traditional variants that I mentioned are basically, like I mentioned, other small mechanics or changes added to trick taking as a mechanic in certain games. And we just call them traditional ones or classic ones or older ones because they were seen in older games, as you'll see when we're going to be talking about them right now, that these variants have been around for a while, but then also are just being used in some modern games now too. And so the one that I want to point out is the variant or a little mechanic that's added called trump cards, or the trump suit specifically, actually. And so the trump suit, the way that works is, as John was explaining, traditionally you would have the leader lead with whatever suit and everyone has to follow. And if you can't play that suit, you have to play off suit. And in that case, you probably won't win that trick. But then if a game has a trump suit mechanic added to it, what that means is, say, the trump suit is heart, for example,
Mhm.
then that means if the leader leads with spade and everyone else has to follow with spade, if it comes to your turn and you don't have a spade, you have to play off suit, right? You don't have the card to follow. But then if you play a heart as your offsuit, then you're actually the one who's winning that trick currently
Mhm.
because it is the trump or the top or the best suit. And so in that way, by adding this trump suit mechanic, people who play offsuit can still end up winning a trick. And so one game that does that has this trump suit mechanic, a modern game, is Fox in the Forest, which I will also mention again later for a different reason. But yeah, this actually has that trump suit idea, which is really cool. Because of this idea, again, that it's not necessarily just predictable that if you can't follow the leader, you just can't win the trick. There's always this way of maybe I can get out the offsuit of being the trump suit and still end up winning the trick. And then what's also interesting about how Fox in the Forest does it as a modern game is that it has a way of changing what the trump suit actually is. So it's not just set at the start of the game for the whole game. It's actually a card that's in the middle between the players that indicates, say the suit is bells. The card shows a bell. So, bells are the trump suit for now, but maybe there's cards that can change that middle card so that it becomes a different suit that's the trump suit. And so that's how that variant works.
Mhm. Yeah, and then talking about other kinds of variants in trick-taking games and style. So going back to a classic game, so if you ever played on your Microsoft Windows computers, on the free games that were on your computer, there is always one called Hearts. So Hearts is a trick-taking game. It's a style of trick-taking for players, And basically how that game works is it's the reason why we're bringing this up is how the scoring works. So as we were talking about in typical trick taking games, you're trying to win, a certain amount of tricks, or you're trying to get certain tricks in order to score. In Hearts, it's done a little bit differently, where the object of Hearts is you're trying to not get points. Your job is to have as few points by the end of the session of playing, however many rounds or however many hands it takes to play. But you're trying to have the lowest score by the end of it. And I think it goes up to 100 points. And the way that works is anytime that you win a trick that contains a heart, right, the heart suit in it from a normal 52 card deck, then you gain 1 point. So if it's a trick of hearts and you win that trick, then you get 4 points, right? And then the Queen of Spades also counts for points, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is 11 or 13. It might be 13, I think, because I think there's 13 regular cards, so it counts as 13. So I think it's 13 points if you win the Queen of Spades. So that's how the tricks would be calculated at the end. See how many people have those, and you calculate and add that to your score, which sucks. But the other reason why we bring it up is that game also had a special rule where what's called shooting the moon. And this is kind of another term that's actually pretty common in trick-taking games, where basically this mechanic of shooting the moon is you're doing something that's basically almost impossible, or not almost impossible, but it's pretty low chances of hitting, which is basically you need to hit a very, very specific objective, and it has to be exactly that, right? So in Hearts, the objective of shooting the moon is winning every single heart and the Queen of Spades by the end of a hand. And if you've done so, rather than you gaining 26 points, which is the total amount, you force every other player at that point to gain 26 points, and you do not add any points to your score. So that's kind of how Hearts takes the mechanic of winning tricks and deciding what you want to do, as well as this additional objective of forcing other people to get points in it. And then another game that also does some odd and different things with scoring and what you're doing with trick taking is this game called Diamonds. Woo! And I literally read the rules like 5 minutes before we started this video. But the idea behind Diamonds is you're also doing trick taking in this game too. But the way that you score is twofold. One is by playing cards off suit, right? So we were talking about how in a trick taking, you have to follow the leader with a suit. And if you usually play off suit, that's usually not a good thing. But in the game of Diamonds, that's actually something you should be trying to aim for, because by playing cards off suit, it allows you to do special abilities that help you gather diamonds, which is part of how you score, trying to get diamonds into your vault so that you can score by the end of the game, right? And then at the end of the hand of tricks, there's also, based on the number of tricks that you've won and the types of tricks, whoever had the most of a certain type of card, or a certain suit of cards, then you get to do certain actions, right? That let you get more points. So it's another variation on whether you should be winning tricks or how you should be winning tricks, or playing off suit in order to score your points at the end of the game.
And so with that variant on scoring and kind of a different objective, instead of just winning tricks, purely trying to win as many tricks as you can, that brings us to another different way of scoring. And that's actually implemented in a modern game, which is actually a remake of an older game called Indulgence. This is by Restoration Games, which is known for basically reskinning, remaking, and streamlining, and even changing rules slightly to bring an older game into a modern audience and modern style. And so this game was actually a remake of, it says it's called a game from 1982 called Dragon Master, which was a version of a game from 1966 called Coup d'etat. But anyways, in Indulgence, as you can see, there are 4 suits also in this game. And as a trick-taking game, it does follow the idea of, again, lead and follow, and you basically are going around playing a certain number of hands for the whole game, and then at the end you're going to count up the points each player has. So you do want points in this one, but then what's different about how Indulgence goes about it is it really plays on the idea of shooting the moon, as John had just brought up with hearts, where in each hand of this game there's going to be there are going to be edicts or rules that are dealt out to the middle, and then the first player is going to be able to choose which rule that every player has to follow. And I think it was based on how well you follow it at the end, which is, you know, it could be like collect the most of this suit by the end of this hand. So you're trying to play tricks to get all of this certain color or this certain suit of cards. And so depending on how well players follow the edict is, I think, will determine how many points they get. It's been a while since I played it, so I'm trying to remember.
Yeah.
But then what's also interesting is there, along with just choosing a rule for players to follow, after the rule is chosen and before players start playing their tricks, they go in order, and one player could choose to sin or choose to do the opposite of that rule. And then that's a way for that single player, in trying to fulfill the opposite of the rule, to get more points than you would normally get by following the rule. But then when they're sinning, everyone else is basically trying to make them fail.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
And
as soon as they fail, they just
then they didn't get any points from it at all. And so it's kind of keeping them from doing this route that can get them more points than normal. But then on top of that, there's the idea of using your, I forgot what it's called, but it was an option you have.
Ring or something.
Yeah,
or
yeah. You have
ring.
like a papal ring or something in this, where the Pope's ring, where then you can use that option once per game to either follow all three rules that are dealt out. So then you're the single player that for that hand trying to fulfill all three of the rules, and you'll get the points for all of them and everyone else gets nothing. Or you could sin against all three rules, trying to fulfill the opposite of all three. And if you fulfill that, basically the opposite rule is always harder, right? It's because if one rule is like, oh, get this many purple cards, the opposite side of it could be get no purple cards, you know, something like that. It's a harder version of just the base rule. And so if you have three of these rules that you're going against, doing the opposite of, if you can fulfill that, you automatically win the game. And so that's like the ultimate shooting the moon, right? It's not even for the like a great amount of points or giving your opponents negative points or anything like that. It's just you'll win the game.
Yeah, it's the reason why it's that strong of immediately winning the game is because I was talking about how difficult it is, like even just in like a hearts version or like what we were just talking about. It's like next to impossible to fulfill, right? It's like so off chance that you could not win, right? Because it's like two of like four suits you're not allowed to collect at all, and then something else, right? In addition to that, and there's four suits, so if you even collect, you have to collect less than 50%, right, of the cards already, in addition to a third added. It's crazy, but
yeah. I mean, I've heard that's like basically never happens. Never happens. But it is interesting, right? That from how I've described it, you can see it really plays on this shooting the moon idea, right? Like different ways to take risks to get more points, or even bigger risks to get even more points, and the biggest risk to just win the game.
Yeah.
And so that's how Indulgence is this variant on scoring also. And so then getting into modern variants and things that I believe are only in modern trick-taking games that weren't around with hearts and all those older ones that used a deck of poker cards.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up Fox in the Forest again. This really is one, I will just say now, it really is one that opened my eyes to like trick-taking being really clever. And so why this also has this modern variant or modern mechanic to it, aside from what I mentioned before of using the trump suit idea, is Fox in the Forest is also a two-player trick-taking game. and it's only 2 players. And that's the mechanic I'm talking about. That's a modern change on trick taking, because all the trick taking games we've been talking about have been 4 players, right? I think pretty much strictly 4
strictly
players.
4 players usually, right? I think there might be some that have like versions for like 3, maybe.
Yeah, Indulgence has 3,
Yeah,
3 to 4 players.
Generally, most trick taking games you want to have 4, right?
Yeah, and so
especially
then,
the classic ones. Classic ones, because it's 52 card deck. You can deal out, to 4 players even.
Yeah, but then Fox and the Forest, like I said, is strictly 2 players. And I think that is a really big change, and makes you kind of wonder, right? For people, especially who grew up with trick taking games, like, oh, how do you forcefully make a 4-player game just 2 players, and keep it interesting, right? But it actually really is very clever in making it 2 players. And I think part of how it works is because of, I guess it has that other variant that we mentioned too, right? With scoring, that is also done differently, where you're not just, going up against one other player, but one person leading, the other follow, and you just try to win tricks, as many as you can, right? That it changes the scoring by basically incentivizing you to win a few number of tricks, or to win almost all the tricks, right? You basically don't want to be too greedy, but you also don't want to be too reserved. And so you need to kind of get in the middle number of tricks that you win to get the most points each hand. And so that's kind of how it makes it work for 2 players, so that you're just trying to go back and forth still, but not just in the simple way of like, I just need the best card, so I'll always win the tricks. It's about getting the right number of tricks to get the most points. And so, yeah, that's the way that it makes it work for 2 players, and thus a modern variant on trick taking.
Yeah, and so another modern one, and this one might be familiar to you if you've been watching our channel and you have been watching our videos. But another variation to trick taking is the cooperative trick taking games, such as The Crew, Quest for Planet 9. We've reviewed this before, so if you want to deep dive into how the game works and what it's about, go watch that video on our page, on the page. But cooperative is another thing that's not a thing that you usually think about with trick taking, because every game that we've talked about thus far is you're trying to beat everybody else, which is usually how it goes. But in The Crew, you're working together, right? So the objective is trying to win certain tricks or have people win certain kinds of tricks. And there's a lot, again, watch our video because there is a number of different rules in it, but there's different things of like winning certain cards or winning at certain times, or winning certain types of tricks and things like that the game goes through, because it's more of a kind of like you're playing different hands that have different rules of what you need to do, right? So kind of following that terminology, but it's definitely a very different take on trick taking. So if you already enjoy trick taking as a game style, if you want to play it working together with people versus against people, check it out.
And then lastly, we do want to mention just one final modern variant, which is very modern because I think it just funded on Kickstarter.
Doesn't even exist yet.
Doesn't exist yet. You can't own it yet. Is the game that we did a Kickstarter preview of, called Ghosts of Christmas. So if you're curious, after what I'm about to explain about it, you can check out our preview video on Ghosts of Christmas. But this is a modern variant because it essentially goes back to the basics of leading and follow and really focusing on that. Well, how it's different is that the players are playing 3 tricks at the same time that can impact each other's outcome, right? And so that's kind of a very interesting take on trick taking too, where it is pretty much the basic idea of it that we talked about at the beginning of this video, right? I believe it does have a trump suit to it, right? And there is scoring to it.
And then the scoring is similar to, I believe I think Spades did it in the past, which is the determining however many exact tricks that you need to win.
Like bidding on how many you think you're
Bidding,
going to win and
bidding
getting
on how
points
many.
based off how correct you are.
Yep.
Yeah, so it has those changes, those variants that we've kind of touched upon already. But the main thing that I would focus on with the game being different is that it's the three tricks happening at the same time, right? It's very interesting to just say that and kind of imagine like how that works. But yeah, you have three tricks, past, present, and future, being played at the same time. And then whoever wins in the past, that first trick, can actually then change what the suit is, the leading suit is for the second one. And in that way affect who's going to win the second one. And then whoever wins that one affects the third trick. And so, yeah, that's another modern variant that is still coming, not even produced yet in the game, but Ghost of Christmas. If you find that an interesting variant, check out our Kickstarter preview video on that. And so with that, in covering, explaining trick taking from the basics all the way to these modern and traditional variants, we kind of wanted actually just to end this with a little sharing of our opinions on either, John, if you have any specific trick taking game that you prefer, or even one of these variants mechanics that you actually like when they're included with trick taking. Yeah, you can share that.
So I'll talk a little bit about probably the game that I'll talk about the game that I like the most, but I think the first thing I want to say is just why I enjoy trick-taking games a lot. I think the thing about trick-taking games is that it's a combination of kind of playing against players and kind of trying to it's kind of deduction, right? You are typically in trick-taking games, you know all of the cards that have been dealt out, right? Like there is no cards that are not dealt out. You like everyone has the same information in the sense of like, you know, all of these cards have been dealt to every single player of whatever number of cards there are. But what your objective is you need to strategize how you need to win your objectives and also prevent other players from winning their objective. Again, not talking about the cooperative version of the crew. You flip it in that way where you need to work together and try to figure out what people need to do. But I think it's that way of like putting in a game where it's not active kind of battling against other players or directly antagonizing other players, but at the same time you kind of are, because you're trying to card count exactly what kinds of cards they're planning on playing or how they're going to play it in order for you to be able to figure out how to get the points that you need. So it's a very thinky style of gameplay. But the cool thing about trick taking is that it's supposed to be fast, right? Trick taking games are supposed to be quick games, right? Because you're supposed to be playing lots of hands of trick taking games in general, right? Like you're not supposed to linger on one hand for like 30 minutes or like 15 minutes to play through the hand. It should be taking you 3 to 5 minutes most per hand to play through in a trick taking game, which is why it's really cool, because it's every single time you're playing a hand, it's can be kind of high stakes, but you're playing through them quickly, right? So you're not spending a long time discussing or deliberating and thinking about the cards. It's you got to do the cards, so you pretty much have to kind of play it pretty quickly. So it allows you to have both the analytical kind of heady alpha min-maxing style in your head, but you also do it pretty quickly at the same time. So that is why I enjoy trick taking a lot, because I get to do that. And of these games, I actually am really interested in what comes out of Ghosts of Christmas. I am very curious about how the strategy changes when you have now an additional set of information for figuring out how to determine not just one trick, because you're not playing into one trick only, you're now playing into 3 different ones that can be influenced by, as we were talking about, winning or not winning a trick from the cards that you have in your hand. So I'm very interested in that one. Of the games I've officially played that I enjoy the most, I'd probably say that I enjoy the crew the most, given that it puts a lot of interesting trick-taking scenarios in place. So it becomes a trick-taking puzzle game with other players at the same time. right? And watch our video for the specifics as to what makes it super interesting, because you can't just talk your way through it. So
And so for me, my thoughts on trick taking in general is, it's like I mentioned at the beginning, I think it's not something I grew up with. And so when I learned about it in modern games, it actually didn't appeal to me. And I would still say it doesn't appeal to me now, though
that's it.
it's been catching my attention more. But it's still not like, a top mechanic that I would look for in a game. And I think the reason is because, being someone who cares a lot about like the theme bringing into a game, I think it's very hard for me to imagine, or I mean, I've never even come across, but it's also hard to imagine a case where trick taking makes sense thematically, like what kind of theme or, real world scenario would involve needing to lead and then follow, and then the leader changes, and then it's all done by these random suits, that are in the game. And so it just never seems like a thematic mechanic. But what has really kind of gotten me more into it recently is because I think the kind of creativity and how clever other mechanics are linked to it in modern games. And so that's what kind of brings me to say that my favorite trick taking game I've played is probably Fox in the Forest. Uh, what?
I'm just kidding. Keep going.
And it's because I think it might have been one of the first. Was it the first? Yeah, it might have been one of the first like modern trick taking games I played. But then I think it did it in such a clever way with a number of these variants and added mechanics to it, where it wasn't just trick taking with one, mechanic add, like a trump suit or something, but it's actually a number of these, like the trump suit and the scoring and the 2-player, that then that then all come together really well to make it a very unique game, a 2-player trick taking game. And so so I think my favorite would probably be Fox in the Forest, which we haven't been able to review yet, but I will avoid saying any score on it right now, so that we can still give you a review of it in the future.
Ben gives it a 4 out of
10. 5 being the highest, though. Special proprietary
out of 100.
But anyways, that is this episode of IGBG Explains Trick Taking. And so if this was helpful, I hope you guys will share this with people you play board games with, friends and family. And I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel and following us on Instagram at IGotBoardGame. And until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.